Thank you. Panel discussion 2. Challenges in cybertechnology. Challenges in geoeconomics. Let me introduce the participants. Moderator, Professor MURAI Jun, Dean of API Institute of Geoeconomic Studies. Distinguished Professor, Keio University, Co-Director, Keio University Cyber Civilization Research Center, and Special Advisor to the Cabinet on Digital Policy. Members of the panel are Nagashima Akihisa, Member of House of Representatives, and Ms. Matsubara, Mihoko, Chief Cybersecurity Strategist, NTT Corporation. I would like to pass the microphone to Professor Murai. Professor Murai, the floor is yours, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As was introduced, I'm Dean of API Institute of Geoeconomic Studies at API. Since April last year, I have been serving in this function. I'm from Keio University. On the security and the economic security, building on those discussions, with those are highly intensive discussions. But in the second part, as it says, challenges in the cyber technology, geoeconomic challenges. So along the line, we would like to have a discussion. We are pleased to have experts from Matsubara-san from NTT, and also a member of the House of Representatives, Mr. Nagashima. Great to have you. About geoeconomic, cyber, and technology. So far, of course, there is a based on this technology. When we talk about geoeconomy, it's economy and security. It's a relationship between the two, and the Pacific, Southeast Asia. I think based on these axes, there have been discussions. What serves as a basis is technology. Technology and economy. The relation between the two has been strengthened. That's the backdrop. So going forward, digital technology, cyberspace, and real ocean or other geological space, how are they all related? There are new movements. And there's another piece here. Here in Japan, COVID-19, this is the year 2 of the global pandemic. And particularly here in Japan, digital transformation. Under what kind of responsibility is it conducted or should be carried out? Digital-related laws, bills, they passed in the upper house, and towards September 1st, there's going to be a start of digital-related legislation. So that's the situation in the national government. There's a big mission, and now the purpose, and there is now institution being established. What about the substance there? I think it's a great opportunity to discuss all those matters. So great to be here. So first of all, I would like to use a set of slides. Let me share that with you. Very briefly, I would like to sort of give you a quick review of the backdrop. And then we'll listen to your discussions. Can you see the slide? Okay. Matsubara-san and Mr. Nagashima, I will ask you these questions, but about the cyberspace environment surrounding Japan, which has been discussed the whole day, and the roles of Japan, and roles and responsibilities of Japan. But to begin with, about cyber attacks, and more importantly, what has been happening, because there have been rapid changes. 2020, major cyber attacks, companies If you look at the left-hand side, there's a new emergence of new technology, ransomware, demanding ransom. There have been those cyber attacks demanding ransom. This is more recent in terms of cyber technology. Has there been national involvement? It's now being discussed in the security because ransom is based on Bitcoin or that kind of cryptocurrency. There's a flow of money, and it's difficult and impossible to track them. So, cryptocurrency has been used actively for ransom. And the big infrastructure, on important infrastructure now attacks have been made. So those, I think, are some characteristics. More recently, again, it's been discussed extensively, ransomware. So this company paid the ransom. Now that's a new piece of news. Before that, the FBI, regarding this ransomware, it was done by the group called DarkSide. It's a Russian group. So maybe there is involvement of the Russian government. So President Biden, there is no evidence that Russia involved, the state involved in the hacking. Almost daily it's happening. These are most recent examples, but we see these things happening. It's the pipeline that's been suspended, which has a huge social impact. One of the characteristics of these cyber attacks is well exemplified here. And Dr. Suzuki already discussed this. Internet, the thorniest issue. From Japan to Southeast Asia, regarding this internet, cable is disconnected. And that's why it's so slow. When it's not suspended, it becomes very high latency. It becomes so slow. So trying to change topology of the undersea bed cables, that's one approach that's been taken. Why is it disconnected, this cable? There have been discussions. Fishermen seem to be very active in these areas, and with the anchors, the cables are sometimes severed. And why does this happen? Here comes the cyberspace technology. Now, gradually we understand this in the research activities. There's a satellite that shows the location information. And for communications, this is the Geo satellite, Android, and other simple devices. But these smartphone-like, even with the slow communication speed, using WeChat Pay, Alipay, money is paid. So the accurate location where you are on the part of maritime location, one can do the communication when you come back, then reward is paid. With that kind of, there are movements of the fishing boats, and then that has probably a side effect of severed cables. These are all communication infrastructure, new infrastructure. So ocean, Japan is right here, connected to Guam. So Guam can use connecting cables to the United States. So reconnecting Southeast Asia with, instead of having this a straight line cable. In the morning session, parallel cables, how to make an investment. The governor talked about this, and the southern part of the Southern Pacific Islands. And then there's a port, and the military submarines. This is what the US, Japan, Australia are concerned about these. So this is a 5G communication environment. Who is going to offer that environment? Now the discussion is becoming active. Economics, communication, infrastructure, and security, they are all commingled. And 2021, a major new technology starting from this year, this is now happening. low Earth orbit satellite, LEO. Preparation has been ongoing for quite a long time, and it was not very well known to people. Thousands of small satellites on the low Earth orbit, let them go around. This has become so active, and it actually became a bankrupt one. But now, with the software bank investment, it's been invigorated. OneWeb is another. Elon Musk's SpaceX. They've launched many satellites. Such information becomes available one after another, and China is participating in the race. On the other day, Asia Development Bank, ADB, issued a detailed report. This is downloadable. So this is the result. The blue dots, LEO satellites, they are all prepared. If you have 1,500 commercial service is available, it says 1,400. That's when the report was issued. It has become 1,500, meaning this is already service ready. OneWeb started launching them. They resumed the activities. Soon they are likely to reach a certain level. So this year, for LEO, internet infrastructure will cover the entire world on the ocean, forest, coverage will be 100%. Space development, in other words, becomes a new infrastructure. Optical fibers, 5G, those are terrestrial network. Against that, a non-terrestrial network coming from the space. Well, this coverage will become overwhelmingly. Space development is now attracting a lot of attention. China went to Mars. So cyberspace will look really different now. So what does that mean? This is what I would like to ask you to discuss or address. About the cybersecurity, digital transformation, and looking at the people and the society, and also from security aspect. So combining these strategies were hammered out the other day. The digital agency is now established, directly reporting to the Prime Minister, and national security, and then societal DX, cybersecurity strategy headquarters, risk. How should we address these relations going forward? That's also very important for Japan's direction. Defense, crime, cybersecurity, in global, international space, domestic space. There is each role, but there has to be good collaboration and coordination. That's something that I always talk about. So I would like to stop here. And the overall cyberspace new backdrop has just been shared with you. And now back to you.
All right. So today, I would like to highly appreciate that they've given me this opportunity, wonderful opportunity. I am the member of the House of Representatives. I have been mainly focusing on national security issues so far as a parliamentarian. When it comes to digital or cyber space, I'm not that of a specialist or expert, but let me share with you some of my thoughts. Firstly, on the digital geoeconomics, what may be the inconvenient truth? There are three things that I would like to mention as inconvenient truths. One thing is all the economic activities, as Dr. Murai has suggested, would be related to national security. So national security considerations should be given to all the economic activities. Globalization. Ever since the ending of the Cold War, the very premise of globalization is now being crumbling. And the digital geoeconomics, so to speak, is in the world of realism. It is highly realistic. That is to say, we are now living in a world where there is a lot of mistrust and distrust abounding around us. And thirdly, what we have pursued as the free and open cyberspace to everyone, to everybody, seems to be too euphoric. So we are in a highly stringent circumstances today. So I should try to explain in plain words. The very premise of globalization is crumbling. I mentioned that earlier. It goes without saying that globalization means without any differentiation or without any discrimination, any region or any country will be able to participate in the international specialization, be it labor cost and also all the other aspects. People who will try to go into where it is the cheapest and the most efficient and try to create the most effective supply chain anywhere in the world. But that kind of euphoric days are now over. Now, politics and economics are to be separated, but that is already a dying situation, be it the leader of the government or leader of the business. The economic affairs and national security go hand in hand. For any digital technology, at the heart of that is semiconductor. So semiconductor is the focus of attention these days. TSMC of Taiwan, which is at the top, the place in terms of semiconductor production and development, TSMC, they have been taking a dual strategy of straddling between U.S. and China, if I may say so, up until now. But they now have to have a rethink of this. And that has become very clear. In Arizona, TSMC is to build a factory there in the United States. TSMC also had an operation in Nanjing. They were trying to build a factory there as well. But I think it would be quite hard for them to reconcile. So TSMC at last have steered around. And in Japan, with TSMC, Japan is trying to jointly establish a research center in Tsukuba. But when I listen to METI, I think that there is something missing there. They're not really up to the circumstances yet. But in any case, everybody is trying to ring-fence the TSMC and other semiconductor capabilities. Now, secondly, about realism, especially to do with the national security and cybersecurity. For the digital geoeconomics, there is almost no internationally established norms or rules. It is a world of anarchy, a jungle, rule of jungle, so to speak, prevail, especially in terms of cybersecurity. There is no deterrence. And the attacker is at a superior advantage. So the attacker would take the very first step, will make the first strike. They are often enticed to make the first move and first attack. So the boundary between the emergency and the peacetime and the military and non-military, everything is gray area today. There are no clear-cut boundaries between them. And every day we have attacks happening and a fight against the attacks happening. Like a time bomb, the malware is being hidden, and the attack is a sudden attack is made enormously. So you cannot really identify the attacker, the criminal, or the perpetrator. So attribution is very hard, very difficult. Then defend forward. It's a concept. You need to go to the forefront to try to defend without or before the threat arrives in the United States, the mainland. And that is a strategy adopted by the United States, the U.S. military. And another thing we need to be careful of is IoT is highly advanced in the military organization. From command and control to the weapon system, everything is being connected by cyber. Everything is moved by cyber. So when you are being imposed on cyber attack, and what to do with mission assurance to try to maintain the mission, if you cannot do that, even with the high performance and expensive weapon system, there would have to be totally moot. And this is highly interesting. As Dr. Murai has mentioned about the space, the communication satellites for the air and eye, the cyber, everything being attacked and destroyed, but still the mission needs to be maintained, be it the Air Force in the United States, the GPS and other communication means, even with all those being destroyed, still the operation can continue. That kind of training is being already done by the U.S. Military. What I have heard is that at Annapolis, about 20 years ago, for the celestial the object, the navigation using celestial objects have being discontinued. But in 2020, once again, that course has been reopened. So the United States is getting serious about this. And what we cannot forget is Ukraine. When Russia have attacked Ukraine, it was called hybrid warfare. For the critical infrastructure, before the attack on their targets, the critical infrastructure were also attacked that have created a major chaos in trying to achieve their objective. So if China tries to do something with Taiwan, they could adopt a similar strategy, similar tactics. And thirdly, I feel hesitant to say this in front of Dr. Murai. I seem to be rather provocative. The internet freedom, the free and open the world of internet, can it be guaranteed for the future as well? Because the United States, when it has monopolized the cyberspace, the free and open was something that could be tolerated. But in the world of digital technology, when you have control over data, then you will be at an advantage for the artificial intelligence to make it cleverer. You have to feed in enormous amount of the data. They would become cleverer and cleverer. As the quality of the data is higher, the performance will become so better. So there will be the keen the fight over data. The other they would try to take away the critical the data, even with their hands into our body, so to speak. And as you may know, there are three major flow of things. One thing is with China and Russia at the center, with authoritarian states, trying to create a digital surveilled the states. For example, the cybersecurity, the law, the national security law, and the national intelligence law. The China is trying to have surveillance and control over everything. And another thing is like the GAFA. Us Japanese are utilizing the GAFA and such services routinely, but the GAFA and such giant companies would try to monopolize the information, the data. And Europe at the center, they are trying to have data privacy and data localization. The GDPR rules are being set. And with the Brussels effect, for the overseas, the rules rulemaking, there is a lot of impact coming from EU. So these are the three flow of things. And if you look at each individually, the free and open cyberspace is no longer there. And that, I think, is the new normal for the geoeconomics. And more than ever, the US-China digital technology, the competition becomes much harsher. And the data seems to be the battlefield. China is trying to monopolize the data even more. And the US is trying to create the clean path and the clean data from the terminals to the whole internet, trying to create a clean network. So they are trying to gain friends, the like-minded countries, partners, and decoupling over the data, the economic blocks are to be created. And to this new normal, what should Japan do? The national security and the industrial policy, there are three things I would like to mention. And for the rest, I would like to leave it to the Q&A session. Human resources building as well as international rules making. There are many places where Japan can play a role. There are two things I would like to mention about the national security. Firstly, most challenging would be critical infrastructure, how to protect them. And I'm sure Ms. Matsubara will be mentioning this about the colonial pipeline incident. The ransomware was already mentioned by Dr. Murai earlier. For critical infrastructure, what is happening? During the peacetime, the private sector businesses are responsible over critical infrastructure, and there could be hackings and other attacks. The businesses will work closely with police, and they have established a council so that on a prefecture-by-prefecture basis, they're having exchange of information and other activities. But as I have mentioned earlier, when the other side is very serious about cyber attack, they could target on the critical infrastructure. Then cyber physical system, the whole system to be protected, and that is to be within the realm of responsibility for the state. But then the kinetic cyber attacks, where there would be physical the harm and damages, we need to protect. But be it self-defense forces or U.S. military are dependent upon the critical infrastructure. But the legislation, be it the communication infrastructure or the transport infrastructure, it is not that the military that has the responsibility for the whole thing. That is not the system established in Japan, nor in the United States. So all the critical infrastructure, the responsibility rests with the private sector businesses. The self-defense force, the cyber defense unit, the number of the staff is not that great. They don't have that much of capability. So how to switch over from the peacetime to the emergency situation in a seamless manner? We need to create that kind of system. Another point is, especially US, UK, France, they are doing it seriously, the active cyber defense. Cyber attack, those the hackers and perpetrators, unless they are actually incapacitated, the attack would never cease. Those cyber attackers, you need to identify them, attribute them, and try to crush their capabilities. So from the day-to-day basis, you need to monitor the activities to be done by potential hackers and attackers. And as you may know, in UK, US, and France, by law, by legislation, for the domestic the people, there are constraints over the interception. But for the communication with the foreign countries, with the national security and other reason, the interception of information is allowed for the authorities. So if it is necessary, the hacking back could be done. The counterattack could be done so that they can take down the attackers. So UK and US and France, there are the very stringent rules attached, but that is allowed. But the secret of communication or the telecommunication the law and illegal access the law would forbid anybody to make access, be it authorities, intelligence authorities, or even the government cannot make access to try to, in a hidden manner, the infiltrate the attackers' network is strictly been forbidden, but we need to do something about this. Lastly, about the industrial policy, if I am to give just one thing we definitely need to do. In the early days of Meiji era, the railways and telecommunication networks have been developed and established by the government. So be it the digital infrastructure, the hardware and platformers, and the training, the government needs to catch up and take on the responsibility. So that, I believe, should be the role to be played by the newly established digital agency. As was mentioned by Dr. Murai, for the digital agency, whether to allow them to have the authority over the cyberspace or as well. I would like to discuss later during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nagashima. Based on the current status of the times, cyberspace and security matters were discussed. Thank you very much. Now turning it to Ms. Matsubara. Are you ready? Yes, it seems you're ready. Please start. Thank you. So I'd like to talk about ransomware, virus attack, and geoeconomics. This ransom attack to colonial pipeline, such cyber attacks on economic security and geoeconomics, what kind of bad effects is it having, as well as what Japan should be doing? First, cybercrime, the current status around the world. In 2019, world's GDP, about 7% or so was the damage caused by cybersecurity. And by 2021, $10.5 trillion. This is more than 10% of world's GDP. It's larger than a single country's GDP. That is the level of damage on economy and security. That is what cybercrime is about. Now, how are countries responding to this attack? This is according to IDC, cybersecurity products and services. What are the sizes of markets around the world? And what is the proportion divided by the population of these countries? In Japan, in 2018, 40.5%. But human labor costs are not included. 40.5 is for Japan. The US is 3 times that. The UK is 2 times that. And Germany is 1.5 times more than Japan. So Japan, as compared to other countries, there seems to be a very gap. Dr. Murai, you talked about ransomware attacks and its gravity. This ransomware attack, why is it having such a bad effect on economy and geoeconomics? This is because our lives, economy, and security. Data is essential, and the IT systems, these are taken hostage, which means that our business continuity itself is taken hostage. So this is an egregious cyber attack. And once you are getting this attack, in the case of an SME, 1 in 5 companies go bankrupt if they are attacked. So this is the gravity of damage, even prior to colonial pipeline. And how egregious is it becoming? This is the dual intimidation, double extortion. They get data before encryption, and they allow it to flow onto the internet partly. This is to show that they have this, and if you don't pay ransom, then the rest would also be leaked. That is the kind of extortion that they do. This is very egregious, even them compared to before. And 80% of such cases in the first quarter was this double extortion attack. the criminals have learned that this is quite effective. And this colonial pipeline, the impact is still being felt. And generally speaking, what was the biggest problem here? Well, cyber attack, cybercrime could become an economic security issue, and this was known to world over because of this incident. Not just the U.S., but the world over, there are thousands and tens of thousands of cyber attacks being carried out. But what is outstanding about this case, this time Colonial Pipeline, is that to a single company, it wasn't a country, one criminal group conducted this cyber attack to a single company, but the economic activity was hindered by this extent. There was great damage to people's lives and to the public. They can give a sense of anxiety to this level. For example, American Airlines needed to change their route, and gas stations, even in Washington, D.C., it's only 60% of them are out of stock. And over gasoline, there is some violence because of shortage of stock. This is something that nobody has seen before. And this did happen in the United States. And in December of last year, COVID-19, or rather, it's as if Kasumigaseki and Japanese large companies all being hit at the same time. So for the industry in the U.S., this was a very shocking incident. So more than ever, the U.S. was very stepping up cybersecurity protection. And then this colonial pipeline attack did take place. And the U.S. pipeline, as a result of ransomware attack, the operation was stopped, not for the first time. According to U.S. government's report, for 2 days before October of 2020, it was stopped operation. So the U.S. government's actions do show that their determination to do something about this. And this time, the U.S. government did respond to this proactively. What is notable about this is that President Biden, a number of times about this colonial incident, he made very concrete statements in press conferences. And attack by a state and attack by criminals were separated. And whoever the attackers are reside in Russia. So that government has to take responsibility partially. And therefore, in the summit meeting between U.S. and Russia, he would like to talk about this. He did said that early on. So a major power, the United States president, did clearly state what he would like to do going forward. So the criminals must have been very afraid. Why can we say that? Because this criminal group, we can observe from their actions that dark side was flustered. Their purpose is not to create problems to a country. They just wanted to make money. They may start making such unreasonable excuses, and they say that they are not involved in geopolitics and they're not involved with the state and the so-called dark side criminal groups. Not just them, but dark web. There are various groups, criminal groups, operating on dark web. There are hacker forums, and they say that they would not be making any advertising on ransomware virus. And the dark side did say that they would suspend their operations. And this ransomware-related attacks did reduce in number world over. But can we take comfort? That's not the case. After a while, since this double extortion type of attacks did come back, and possibly dark side may start using a different name, and they may once again start making these attacks, according to many experts. And of course, this not just limited to colonial pipeline, but the world over, there are many ransomware attacks with severe damage. But with this colonial incident, there is a clear differentiation. For example, the largest case so far was 4 years ago, NotPetya cyber attack. The virus called NotPetya was used. In the background, there's Russia's GRU, Main Intelligence Directorate of the General Staff, may have been involved, according to US, UK, and EU. But Russia clearly denies this, but not PET and colonial dark side. What's the difference between them? There are three. Who is the perpetrator, whether it's a criminal group or a nation state? Whether the target is one company or more broad. Many countries and many industries are covered in the target. Whether the purpose is to cause damage to a country or just to make money. Those are the differences. Even if it is just one single criminal, if they are targeting just in one company, in one industry, these are the repercussions that you can have on the economic activity of a country or the people of that country. That was what Colonial Pipeline incident was about. And in Japan, this wasn't reported very much. But in this colonial incident, in the background, there was a very grave ransomware attack taking place in the United States, which was Washington, D.C. police. Babuk, again, a group that is active in Russia. They are a criminal group using ransomware. And unfortunately, their attack succeeded. And because it was double extortion, 250 gigabyte worth of data, huge amounts of data, was stolen from Washington, D.C. police. And informant's information was also included. And if you don't pay ransom, then the informant's information would be exposed. This was the extortion, and according to the reports, such sensitive information that may have to do with people's lives should not be exposed. And therefore, the police, what they did is that in order to avoid such leakage of information, they offered to pay $100,000. And this group, Babuk, said that that amount of money is not acceptable. So their negotiation broke down, and they said that they would expose all information, all data. And on May 13th, that is 2 weeks after, all data was exposed and released. What was included in that data is the individual information, sensitive information of individuals, as well as investigative information. And Washington, D.C. police, not just their information, but Secret Service and FBI information was included. So in this case, so far, U.S. police departments, there have been ransomware attacks in the past, and many have been successful. And there have been a number of cases where a ransom was paid. But this level is quite different. Informants to the police, as well as police officers' information was exposed, and there could be some danger on their lives. And what kind of bad influence that would have for the future investigations, it really cannot be predictable. And the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, to Wall Street Journal's interview, he did admit that he paid $500 million in ransom. There were some reports that he may have paid ransom, to whether to pay ransom or not. There's a lot of hot debate going on, but even among experts, they're divided. This is a very difficult issue because, of course, the justice authorities say that people should not pay, because if you pay ransom, this will be used as the funds for criminal groups to carry out next attacks. So this could be punished according to the Treasury Department. And the METI also gave such warning to business management. But whether that is possible, if you look at this realistically, the percentage of success in preventing a damage is very low. It's 25% in US and 22% in UK and only 5% in Japan to prevent damage. But if you're only looking for a chance of success, for example, if information is leaked, endangering people's lives, or your customers or trading partners' information could be exposed, you are afraid. What kind of impact will there be on lifelines you feel that it may be better for you to pay. When you have to make such a difficult decision, there are many companies that end up paying ransom. But after making that payment, whether you can get the data back, that's not the case. It's only 8% of the companies who are able to restore all data. Even after paying the ransom, there's going to be the cost of replacing your system, and you have to pay for investigation. And therefore, recovery cost would be doubled if you pay ransom. So which is the better option, whether to pay or not? It's not decided even amongst the experts. Now, in the case of Japan, CrowdStrike, an American company, announced this data in November of last year. 50% of Japanese companies have been the target of attacks, and 30% of them have paid ransom, and the average amount paid is higher, slightly higher than the world average, which means that this colonial attack is not something that Japan can be looking at as somebody else's problem. Now, DarkSide is the criminal group that carried out this cyber attack on Colonial. Now, this DarkSide to Toshiba Tech at around the same time, to an office in Europe, were carrying out attacks according to reports. And not just limited to Toshiba Tech, but over the past half year, ransom attacks, there is a clear pattern. Large Japanese companies, overseas offices are being targeted, and I have listed the names of such companies. Shionogi, Capcom, very well-known companies have been targeted. Why attacks have been carried out against these companies? I think there are two reasons. One is that business has become global. Of course, globalization is not just limited to Japanese companies, but in the case of Japanese companies, because of aging of the population and shrinking of the population, they tend to be oriented towards overseas markets rather than domestic markets. That's their imperative. And in order to gain overseas markets, they're making huge investments, and they have a lot of M&A plans. So what happens in the end? IT assets become very complex overseas. So head office is in Japan would find it difficult to centrally manage these things. When that becomes difficult, cybersecurity measures would also be difficult to be taken. And in the midst of COVID-19 in 2020, we're currently using Zoom, talking on a webinar. But I'm sure that all of you have online meetings in large numbers. You're using various cloud tools. So in COVID-19, the amount of usage of IT, digitalization, and digital transformation is making so much progress very rapidly, not just in Japan, but globally. But are we really doing a good job in terms of cybersecurity measures? Cybersecurity measures of IT assets is really falling behind, and cyber attackers know this very well. They know that now is the time to make money. Now is the time to make attacks. So they're really intent on engaging in these attacks in large numbers. And so ransomware attacks, according to certain statistics, it's up by 480%. So that is the level of fierceness of these attacks. The else's problem for Japan, as we promote digital transformation, people working remotely from home, as long as that continues to be the case, security has to be revisited. I think this is an urgent challenge for Japan. And as I said before, this is no longer a cyber attack to a single company. A country, a region, or a global economic security could be undermined as a result of these attacks. So it's not just governments, but each company must take more ownership in taking measures to step up their cybersecurity. And ransomware attacks, now that this is being used around the world, causing so much damage, we have started to witness these examples in many cases. So Japanese companies' overseas offices who are likely to become targets. There has to be good cybersecurity measures to be taken by these offices. But according to statistics, ransomware attacks, once you become subject to such attacks, the likelihood of being able to prevent that is very small. But if your data is taken hostage, you have to have backup so that even if you're attacked, you will have data. And once you're infected, what to do? If you're asked to pay ransom, how do you respond? You need to be prepared. Such policies and procedures must be developed in advance. Otherwise, you cannot deal with crisis. But according to research, companies that have such procedures is only 50% of companies around the world. So this is an area where cybersecurity can be stepped up. The other day, Prime Minister Suga and President Biden, in their meeting, they talked about cybersecurity and supply chain risk. And even in the Quad Summit meeting, enhancing cooperation in these two areas was discussed. So ransomware attacks and cyber attacks, once it becomes something that could threaten world and Japan's economic security, when it becomes such a huge threat, we have Japan-US alliance and Quad and bilateral and multilateral cooperation. It's a matter of how much information sharing can take place, how much contribution can we make in supply chain diversification, how can we contribute in international cooperation. I think this is the time Japan should focus our efforts in this area. So I do urge you to take an interest in this matter so that we can put up a fight together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very important points made by the two panelists in the industry area. These are the things happening, serious things happening, especially on the pipeline, and how Biden administration responded to this. That was also covered. And Mr. Nagashima talked about the national system institution and also in the world of military what has been happening. So geoeconomically speaking, in those two areas, I hope we can have a discussion. Matsubara-san, as I listen to you and Mr. Nagashima, in the area of industry, these are the things happening, and in a way, of course, for critical infrastructure, it matters, but it's not just limited to critical infrastructure or the industry. In the industry and the economic area, in terms of approaching these, what would be the most important things? As I listen to you, and more I listen to you, with the military security and the economic activities and economic policies, you can't divide them. I mean, there are various methodologies, but including critical infrastructure, it's all part of the network. Industry-wise, there's our defense industry, Japanese defense, there's Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. I'm sorry to cite the name, but they suffered from cyber attacks. The government, in a way, to physically defend the infrastructure, so that it would not be the scope of the cyber attacks, and should they be attacked, being able to respond to those cyber attacks, that kind of a system or institution has to be there. Otherwise, you can't really defend it. And because of that clean network concept is now we see in the United States. There are very many experts here listening to your presentation, and also since 9/11, the Homeland Security system was established, and then on cybersecurity, various or several movements we have witnessed in this regard. as Mr. Nagashima mentioned, national security and economic security issues, how they can be all connected when it's addressed. But looking at those cases, the US is having a difficult time because there are segmentation and the different people cover different areas, and then pulling together, working together, as you have mentioned, creating such a system institution wouldn't be an easy task, yet it has to be done. Ms. Matsubara, the industry sector or area and security itself, those issues now all connected, interconnected. I think that's the situation. As a background, what do you think?
Yes, just as you say, the issue of security and economics cannot be separated anymore, especially the military and self-defense forces included. For critical infrastructure, be it the water system, electricity system, supply and services are being provided by the private sector businesses, but then the military, the defense. How can they cooperate with the private sector? That needs to be contemplated. About a week ago, the Koji Apple, in a radio the program by Ida Koji, the Admiral Kawano, the former the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, that he has discussed that now the new regime is being created, and Admiral Kawano has mentioned that the self-defense forces are now teaming up with the private sector businesses and employing the private sector businesses, that the information is being shared and exchanges are seen between the military and the industry. That seems to be quite important. And from the industry, maybe I should have changed the order, but I would like to ask about the government structure. Now, the government institution, and especially the Ministry of Defense or the police, and there are other intelligence-related organizations, and the regime to be created would be quite important for the cybersecurity issue. There have been points that have been raised by Honorable Nagashima's earlier speech, and if we compare ourselves to the other countries, or as we think in terms of Japan, US, the security alliance, there are many challenges and many issues that we need to grapple with. And unless we make the move now, we would not make time. The time is no longer with us. There are some basics. So what would you suggest? I believe the components are already there. A digital agency is now to be created, and that would be the command post. And the NSC, the National Security the Council, the economics team that has been created. Whether the team would be enough or not is being argued. But with the whole of government, integrated approach needs to be adopted, and that is at last to be understood by the government of Japan. Because Japan has been behind, we will be quick in trying to catch up. We will be able to make a leapfrog. The most delayed would be we have to have industry, the academy, and the government needs to work together. But the most lagging behind is the academia. Everybody else have a pole and mole being fused together. Politics and the military being fused together. But when it comes to the industry and academia, that cannot be separated out. But in case of Japan, it has been decoupled. We don't like security. We don't like the military. There is something of an allergy amongst the academics, but we need to overcome that. If not, we cannot have a working relationship amongst the industry, academia, and the government when it comes to cutting-edge research. And when we create the research and development the system, how to deal with the intellectual property, the sensitive information, and the educational organizations need to also be responsible. Of course, there are governments who are trying to interfere and penetrate. I'm sure there are different arguments that we need to take up, but unfortunately, we are running out of time.
Lastly, Japan to the world globally, what kind of mission does Japan have? What kind of contribution can Japan make? What role should it assume? I'd like to ask the two panelists to speak about this before we close this panel session, starting with Ms. Matsubara. What is Japan's role and responsibility to the rest of the world? I talked about the current status of Japan's cybersecurity measures. I made some severe comments. Previously, I was in Ichigaya, and now I'm with the Japanese company. Over the past few years, Japanese companies, more than before, are trying very hard to step up their cybersecurity. And this is something that we can be proud to the rest of the world. But such great work being done. What's not being done in the United States, which is desirable to be done, is, for example, human resource development. But that's not turned into the English language. So I hope that this could be translated into the English so that this is the best practice in Japan. This worked well in Japan. This lesson could be learned in the United States and the UK. We have to be more proactive in showing that to other countries so that from the US and the Quad could look upon Japan with a degree of more importance. Such mutual cooperation between the countries could be expected to be realized. Mr. Nagashima, what's the role for Japan? Rulemaking. In Osaka G20, DFFT was laid down. People agreed on DFFT. Japan took the lead. European type information, personal information protection, and the US type. There are two streams, but Japan could connect the two. I think that is a role for Japan to play. I agree. Thank you very much. So the two of you, you said that the best practice of Japan, according to Ms. Matsubara, and Mr. Nagashima, you said that
in the international community, making up proposals and then moving them forward. But it's based on the premise that this is a good country, that the land is protected, and then people are proud. Unless you have this substance, you can't really communicate to others. There are no best practices. So maybe going back to that point, but this country must become a robust country. That's number one. And to that end, one opportunity is 2021, various bills and other moves. And with the digital agency, that institution is now there. The mission is there. And then to the world, roles of Japan can be fulfilled. I think that would be an ideal. So to that end, we have to make steps forward. Thank you so much for your valuable contributions today. I think that has been indeed a fulfilling experience. I feel that I have given quite a lot of homework. I am grateful to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.